at the forefront of politics.
Our enemy is Trump. He is the enemy. We got to unite. If we're not a united party, we lose to Trump.
On the front lines of activism.
There's certain fights, if we don't engage, they win. This is a fundamental question of who we are.
And delivering your daily dose of comedy.
Donald Trump, when he had his physical, they had his blood pressure, and mine is higher than his. Oh. And the irony is mine is higher because of him.
From the blue wave.
We flipped. Enough seats to take control of the House. We control the House.
To 2020 and beyond. This is the Dean Obeidallah Show on Sirius XM Progress, Channel 127.
And welcome to the show, brothers and sisters. Friday, November 22nd. I'm Dean Obeidallah. As always, hoping to be your MBFF. On Twitter at Dean Obeidallah. I'm there. Facebook.com/Dina Radio. Folks, what a week. WTF of a week. So much that happened this week and last in terms of impeachment. We even had a Democratic debate jammed in the middle. I'm winded, yet excited. Isn't that remarkable? Like, there's so much going on. It was taxing, but invigorating at the same time to watch history lay itself out in front of us. I mean, we are watching and covering and talking about history together. And what I like this show better, not just because I host it, but that's not why, better than watching MS or CNN coverage, is that it's not just really great experts we have on, which we do, but I get to hear from you. I get to hear your views, and you get to be a part of this conversation, which I think the grassroots is left out on cable news. Here you're not. You're such an important part of it, and I was so glad to have so many great conversations this week about what your views were on impeachment, the Democrats, the testimony, and where we're going from here. Today's show in the first hour, I'm going to go through a lot of the big clips and lay it out very simply, some of the highlights from last week's testimony and this week's testimony, and what I think are some of the key parts in telling a story, in creating a narrative that shows Trump's crimes plus destroys the GOP defenses. But first, today Donald Trump tried to respond to the entire 2 weeks of hearings by going on Fox News, and oh my gosh, I didn't even watch the whole thing. I watched clips. It went from an interview on Fox and Friends into a hostage situation where Trump would not let them go. Brian Kilmeade started asking tougher questions, I think, just to get rid of Trump. It was unreal to watch it. And Trump said, I got to be honest, the takeaway from Trump's appearance was panic. Panic. This is a guy freaking out. And he should be. I mean, let's be blunt. The evidence is uncontroverted and overwhelming. And anyone facing this kind of evidence and watching your defenses wither, you'd be panicky too. So I don't blame him for being panicky. I'd probably be panicky too. This is horrible where he is. He's going to be the third president impeached in the history of the United States of America. There's no doubt. And he potentially could be the first one removed. And I know that's a tall order, but we're not done. This is not over yet, what's going on. So let's touch on, I got to love this. So Trump goes on, and Fox, and as I call it, Fox and white friends, because there's only white people on it, and says something that was brutally honest. We don't have a lot of honesty, but here's Donald Trump being honest about what he's always is worried about and focused on. Clip number one.
Your ambassador to the EU, Mr. Sondland, in his opening statement said that there was quid pro quo. There was quid pro quo, he said, because you wanted an investigation into corruption in exchange for a visit to the White House or something like that.
Yeah, well, that's total nonsense. I do want always corruption. I say that to anybody.
I do want always corruption. Remember those words. I do want always corruption. Donald J. Trump. That'll be the buzzwords. Every president, John F. Kennedy, ask not what you can do, what your country can do for you, what you can do for your country. Donald Trump is, I do want always corruption. He does. Finally. Some honesty. It took all these years. I do want always corruption. He also, I won't subject you to listening to more of his stupidity. He did also say, I want a trial. I want a trial too. I agree. I want a criminal trial though. Not a show trial where you have completely raised money and tainted and bribed the juror. He has bribed the jury. Donald Trump is literally raising money for the jurors. It is beyond. This is like a mobster who can legally bribe a jury, and that's what the Senate is. He is legally raising money for senators who are up for re-election in tough states. So he's bribing the jury right in front of us, and it's legal. It's not illegal. It's completely legal. It's just unethical. And I really wish the Republican senators would not take the money, but of course they will. He also talked about quote, Ukraine is the third most corrupt country in the world, close quotes. They're the third worst corrupt. He talked about the corruption is so rampant in the Ukraine. Unbelievable. That's why when he got on the phone July 25th with the president of Ukraine, he made it clear he was so concerned about all the corruption. That's why he asked about Joe Biden and Hunter Biden from 2016. That's what you do when you're worried about widespread corruption. It's a sea, an ocean of corruption. But he only asked about the fish called Biden. That's Trump, folks. Come on. You've got to be. No, I don't even hear Republicans parroting that he was about corruption. He was fighting corruption. They're doing the whole thing that Ukraine was attacking us because no one with a straight face can say that. And then I got to fact check something Trump said here to make it clear that he was just, and this shows how panicky. He lied. He went on Fox and Friends. I know he lies a lot, but he lied. And the lie tells you how concerned he is about something. He lied about the phone call on July 26th, the day after the one he had with President Zelensky. And that's the phone call with Gordon Sondland, his ambassador, who gave $1 million for the job, calls him up they're having lunch, him and David Holmes, having lunch with two other people, and he's on the phone there, and he says to Trump, President Zelensky loves your ass, and Trump is heard saying to Sondland, is he going to do the investigation? And Sondland says yes. And David Holmes testified to that. And Trump said today, I guarantee you that never took place. He denies the phone call took place. Here's the problem. Donald Trump's own ambassador, Gordon Sondland, a man he tweeted about calling a great American, had this to say about that very phone call under oath just Wednesday. Clip number 2, please.
On July 26th, you confirm you did indeed have the conversation with President Trump from a restaurant in Kyiv that David Holmes testified about last week. Is that right?
Correct.
And you have no reason to doubt Mr. Holmes' recounting of your conversation with the president?
The only part of Mr. Holmes' recounting that I take exception with is I do not recall mentioning the Bidens. That did not enter my mind. It was Burisma in 2016 election.
You're not making it better, Sondland. So Gordon Sondland confirms this phone call happened, that he talked about Burisma to Donald Trump, and that he also confirms that he said to Zelensky's going to do your investigations that he wants. So Trump, unprompted, asked about the investigations. For Trump to say that never happened, it doesn't exist, it says a lot. He is so worried about this phone call. And so here's what I want to do. These are a lot of clips. I want to go through them in a simple, straightforward way about what we learned over the last 2 weeks from public hearing with clips from different witnesses. So it's one stop shopping. If you missed a lot of stuff, here you go. You're going to get a taste of each testimony and what they said in the narrative. That's very clear what happened. And the bottom line, the takeaway from these 2 weeks of public hearings, the GOP defenses, utterly gone, destroyed. And that's by testimony under oath. So if they want to go under oath on the other side and contradict him, let's see who does that. But no one has. Second, Donald Trump has committed impeachable offenses and crimes. And again, there's no disputing that. So let's start out here. Let's start last Wednesday, not this week, last Wednesday, the first public testimony, Ambassador Bill Taylor, who was appointed the temporary ambassador after they did a smear campaign against Marie Yovanovitch. Here's Ambassador Bill Taylor talking about the military aid that Donald Trump withheld and why this was so vitally important to the Ukrainians and to the United States of America, to our national security. And I think this is so important to understand the stakes and the gravity of this. Donald Trump withheld military aid which hurt the United States of America, our national security. It risked the lives of our allies. It threatened the security of our NATO allies in Europe. And he did it all because he wanted the Ukrainians to help him in the 2020 campaign. So here's just Bill Taylor on the importance of this aid, because these are the stakes. This is what Donald Trump did. He hurt this aid. Clip number 3, please.
Ukraine is important to the security of the United States. The largest country in Europe by landmass, Ukraine is a young democracy struggling to join Europe and ally itself with the United States. It has been violently attacked by Russia, which continues its armed aggression against Ukraine to this day. If we believe in the principle of the sovereignty of nations, on which our security and the security of our friends and allies depends, if we believe that nations get to decide on their own economic, political, and security alliances, we must support Ukraine in its fight against its bullying neighbor. Russian aggression cannot stand. Republican and Democratic administrations over 3 decades have been generous with assistance funding, both civilian and military, and political support. With overwhelming bipartisan majorities, Congress has imposed harsh sanctions on Russia for invading and occupying Ukraine. Mr. Chairman, there are 2 Ukraine stories today. The first is the one we're discussing this morning that you have been hearing about for the past 2 weeks. It's a rancorous story about whistleblowers, Mr. Giuliani, side channels, quid pro quos, corruption, and interference in elections. In this story, Ukraine is merely an object.
Exactly, and it's an object for Donald Trump to use as a prop to help his 2020 campaign. So that's what that was about. Now let's go in more of the substance. Here is Bill Taylor again with George Kent. George Kent, you might recall, the guy with the bow tie, Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for European and Eurasian Affairs. And they talked about very clearly, in their view, and all the communications they had with the Trump administration in D.C., even though they're a part of it, but Trump administration officials, what Donald Trump's concern was. Was it truly rooting out corruption? Let's have 2 men under oath tell us their view based on their years and years of experience serving our nation. Clip number 4, this is with Adam Schiff talking to them.
I take it in your discussions, Ambassador Taylor, with Ambassador Sondland or others, what was communicated to you was that the president wanted investigations into 2016 and the Bidens, not into an oligarch named Zlochevsky or self-dealing, but 2016 and the Bidens. Was that your understanding?
That was my understanding.
And in fact, when you said your staff overheard this call between Ambassador Sondland and the president, in that call, the president brings up investigation, does he not?
He did.
And immediately after the president gets off the phone with Sondland, Sondland is asked by your staff, what does the president think about Ukraine? And his answer is, he's just interested in the Bidens, am I right?
He said he was more interested in the Bidens.
More interested in the Bidens. No discussion of Zlochevsky or Chalupa or things that happened 7 years ago. He was interested in the Bidens.
Yes, sir.
So it's very clear. We know he's interested in the Bidens. And let's continue on. On Friday, Marie Yovanovitch testifies, the U.S. ambassador to the Ukraine, the woman who was smeared by Rudy Giuliani, by Donald Trump Jr., by Fox Media allies, and the 2 guys, Giuliani associates who are indicted right now, Lev Parnas and Igor Fruman. And I play a short clip here, Marie Yovanovitch, talking about how the president could have simply fired her. But they smeared her, and she still doesn't understand why did they attack her. Here's clip number 5.
I mean, there's a question as to why the kind of campaign to get me out of Ukraine happened. Because all the president has to do is say he wants a different ambassador. And in my line of work, perhaps in your line of work as well, all we have is our reputation. And so this has been a very painful period.
And I play that clip to remind you first about Marie Yovanovitch. She's the woman who admits testimony. Donald Trump's tweeting, trying to intimidate her on Twitter. But second, they wanted to destroy her. The stakes were so high that they viewed her as standing in the way of their criminal conspiracy to extort the Ukrainians to help Trump in the 2020 election, plus to make some money here. And that's different. We didn't even explore that in his testimony. So that's Yovanovitch. Now let's turn to Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman, Purple Heart recipient. And he talks about, the clip I'm going to play, the July 25th famous phone call. Donald Trump talking to the president of the Ukraine, Zelensky. Vindman's on the call. He's one of the handful of people on the call. And this is the call where Trump says to Zelensky, I would like you to do us a favor, though. And then he adds, there's a lot of talk about Biden's son, that Biden stopped the prosecution. And a lot of people want to find out about that. So whatever you can do with that attorney general would be great. So here is Vindman on why he felt compelled to report that phone call he heard to the National Security Council right after the phone call. Here's clip number 6.
Colonel Vindman, what was your real-time reaction to hearing that call?
Chairman, without hesitation, I knew that I had to report this to the White House counsel. I had concerns, and it was my duty to report my concerns to the proper people in the chain of command.
So Alexander Vindman, so alarmed by what he heard, reports at National Security Council lawyers. And then Vindman adds why he believed that this conversation with Trump and Zelensky was not a favor, but a demand. And here's the next clip.
Chairman, the culture I come from, the military culture, when a senior asks you to do something, even if it's polite and pleasant, it's not to be taken as a request. It's to be taken as an order. In this case, the power disparity between the two leaders, my impression is that in order to get the White House meeting, President Zelensky would have to deliver these investigations.
So up until this point in time, in the real timeline of life, you have a campaign for months and months and months to destroy the career of Marie Yovanovitch, our ambassador to the Ukraine. She was standing in the way of Donald Trump and Rudy Giuliani's plans. And the plans we know about for sure have to do with helping Donald Trump in the 2020 election. It culminates with two different things. One, a July 10th meeting in the White House, which we'll play clips about that in a second. But the July 25th phone call is so important. It is so alarming. Vindman goes to National Security Council and flags it. Now, let's talk about some of the GOP defenses to all of this, because right now you painted a picture of an ongoing criminal conspiracy involving bribery and extortion and campaign finance violation. The GOP's defenses are Joe Biden's involved in corruption. The Ukraine attacked our election in 2016. The Ukrainians did not know on the date of the July 25th phone call that we were withholding aid from them. And there was a corruption issue going on in the Ukraine. And little by little, those are destroyed. First of all, here is Ambassador Kurt Volker. Kurt Volker was called by the Republicans. Kurt Volker completely clears Joe Biden based on his years of experience in Ukraine and knowing Joe Biden. He's our ambassador. So here is clip number 8.
Ambassador, let me also ask you about the allegations against Joe Biden, because that has been a continuing refrain from some of my colleagues as well. Why was it that you found the allegations against Joe Biden related to his son or Burisma not to be believed?
Simply because I've known former Vice President Biden for a long time. I know how he respects his duties of higher office, and it's just not credible to me that a Vice President of the United States is going to do anything other than act as how he sees best for the national interest.
That was their witness. And then you had Laura Cooper testify, Assistant Secretary of Defense, who made it clear, first of all, the Ukrainians knew on July 25th, on that very day of the phone call, the aid was withheld. She testified to that. And then she added that by May of this year, months before Trump's phone call on July 25th, the Department of Defense had certified that the Ukrainian government had completed the anti-corruption measures needed to be able to get the release of the aid. And here she is talking about that with Congressman, I think, Swalwell or Himes. Here's clip number 9.
Sir, the process that took place for the certification took place prior to the May certification to the U.S. Congress.
So, right. Not only did it take place before, as required by law, but months before President Trump froze the money, the Department of Defense, in consultation with state, sent a letter to Congress certifying, and you said this in your opening statement, the government of Ukraine has taken substantial actions to make defense institutional reforms for the purposes of decreasing corruption, increasing accountability, and sustaining improvements of combat capability enabled by U.S. assistance. So by the time President Trump froze the aid, the Department of Defense had spent weeks, if not months, determining that the Ukrainian government met every requirement in the law and made significant strides in combating corruption. Is that correct?
That is correct. We made that determination in May.
We made it in May. So there goes that last GOP defense. And there's one more defense. We'll play Dr. Fiona Hill in a few minutes. The defense, the claim about the Ukrainians were attacking our elections. And She made it very, very clear in her opening statement. Dr. Fiona Hill was so impressive yesterday. Let's jump to clip number 14. This is the last GOP defense, and here as it falls, that the Ukraine was not involved in any way in attacking our election. Only one country was Russia, and the talking point that the Ukraine attacked us, where does that come from? Vladimir Putin. And you have the GOP literally peddling a Vladimir Putin conspiracy theory, which clears Russia, which is in Russia's interest, not in America's interest. Clip number 14, please.
This relates to the second thing I want to communicate. Based on questions and statements I've heard, some of you on this committee appear to believe that Russia and its security services did not conduct a campaign against our country, and that perhaps, somehow, for some reason, Ukraine did. This is a fictional narrative that has been perpetrated and propagated by the Russian security services themselves. The unfortunate truth is that Russia was the foreign power that systematically attacked our democratic institutions in 2016. This is the public conclusion of our intelligence agencies, confirmed in bipartisan congressional reports. It is beyond dispute, even if some of the underlying details must remain classified.
And then we get to the big witness, Gordon Sondland, the man who gave $1 million to get this job, who Donald Trump appointed, who he called a great American last week on Twitter. And Gordon Sondland testifies under oath about what transpired. First, Gordon Sondland names names to make it clear he was not doing something rogue. He was working with everybody in the administration. They were all in on this. It goes all the way to the top, Donald Trump and down. Let's hear clip number 10 as he names names.
First, Secretary Perry, Ambassador Volker, and I worked with Mr. Rudy Giuliani on Ukraine matters at the express direction of the President of the United States. We did not want to work with Mr. Giuliani. Simply put, we were playing the hand we were dealt. We all understood that if we refused to work with Mr. Giuliani, we would lose a very important opportunity to cement relations between the United States and Ukraine. So we followed the president's orders.
They followed the president's orders. They all worked together. He named Perry. He named Pompeo. He even named Mike Pence. Sondland's named everybody. Now, if any of them want to clear their name, they should testify under oath. But they won't because they can't. And then Gordon Sondland closed the equation. Gordon Sondland told us point blank there was 2 quid pro quos. This for that. 2 counts of bribery. 2 counts of extortion. 1, if the Ukrainians wanted a meeting at the White House, they'd talk about an investigation into the Bidens publicly. And secondly, even worse, this aid that they were desperate for, having a hot war with Russia, they were only going to get. Only. They went to a microphone and said investigation into the Bidens. So here's first, Gordon Sondland on quid pro quo with the meeting in the White House visit, clip number 11.
Fourth, as I testified previously, Mr. Giuliani's requests were a quid pro quo for arranging a White House visit for President Zelensky. Mr. Giuliani demanded that Ukraine make a public statement announcing the investigations of the 2016 election, DNC server, and Burisma. Mr. Giuliani was expressing the desires of the President of the United States, and we knew these investigations were important to the President.
And if you have any doubt they were important to the President, we've had other people testify that David Holmes heard the conversation with Gordon Sondland. Gordon Sondland had this phone conversation on July 26th, saying Donald Trump asked, how's the investigations? He's going to do it, Zelensky. And then Gordon Sondland here add the second part, quid pro quo for the release of the military aid. This military aid is 10% of the total Ukrainian military budget. They're in the midst of a hot war with Russia, who is backing separatists on their border, killing Ukrainians. And Donald Trump withheld this as leverage to force the Ukrainians to make an announcement to help Donald Trump's 2020 campaign. It is that simple. Donald Trump put his personal reelection over the national interest, national security of the United States of America. Here's clip number 12.
And, in fact, you had a discussion, communication with the Secretary of State in which you said that logjam over aid could be lifted if Zelensky announced these investigations, right?
I don't recall saying the logjam over aid. I recall saying the logjam. I don't know that.
That's what you meant, right, Ambassador?
I meant that whatever was holding up the meeting, whatever was holding up our deal with Ukraine, I was trying to break. Again, I was presuming.
Well, here's what you said in your testimony a moment ago.
Okay.
Page 18. But my goal at the time was to do what was necessary to get the aid released, to break the logjam. Okay, that's still your testimony, right?
Yeah.
So the military aid is also an official act, am I right?
Yes.
This is not President Trump's personal bank account he's writing a check from. This is $400 million of U.S. taxpayer money, is it not?
Absolutely.
And there was a logjam in which the president would not write that U.S. check, you believed, until Ukraine announced these 2 investigations the president wanted, correct?
And he says correct. They got cut off there, but he said correct. I can assure you he said correct after that. The reality is Gordon Sondland is still protecting someone. There is something still missing here because Gordon Sondland refused to back off from his statement. I presume the president was saying the aid, as well as the meeting, the aid would not be released until the Ukrainians announced investigation. And he got pressed on that all day. And he kept saying, this was my presumption. This is what I believed. And they would say to him, did Trump tell you specifically on the aid? And he would say, no, but this is my presumption. Now, either he's protecting Trump or his understanding of dealing with Trump made it very clear. When Donald Trump said to Sondland, and this is not disputed, both Gordon Sondland testified to this and David Holmes, who heard the conversation, said this, that when Sondland was on the phone with Trump, he asked, what do you want from Zelensky? And he said, I want him to do the right thing. We all have seen mob movies. We know what that means. Do the right thing. Do the right thing is announce the investigation. That's what he wanted. There's no doubt about it. And then Fiona Hill, to make it even more clear what was going on, she testified, and she was remarkable yesterday, Dr. Fiona Hill, about a meeting in the White House. There's Gordon Sondland July 10th with Ukrainian officials and saying, hey, we got to deal with Mick Mulvaney. That's what he says. And we're not going to release the aid. You only invoke Mick Mulvaney, not because of a White House meeting. Mick Mulvaney's in charge of OMB, Office of Management and Budget. He is the guy with the aid. He is the guy withholding the aid. So when he says, we've got to deal with Mick Mulvaney, and there's no disputing that, he said that, it's because they're withholding aid. They all know what's going on. And here is Fiona Hill talking about, she was so frustrated with Gordon Sondland because he was not keeping her and her boss, John Bolton, in the loop. And then she came to the epiphany that Sondland was doing what Donald Trump wanted. And others were in the loop, like Pompeo and Mick Mulvaney. They were left out of this loop. So what Sondland was doing was not a rogue activity. It was what Trump wanted. And he wanted an investigation into the Bidens. And if he didn't do that, there was not going to be a meeting and there was not going to be military aid. And here's Fiona Hill with this, revealing the epiphany she had. Clip 15.
That he wasn't coordinating with us because we weren't doing the same thing that he was doing. So I was upset with him that he wasn't fully telling us about all of the meetings that he was having. And he said to me, but I'm briefing the president. I'm briefing Chief of Staff Mulvaney. I'm briefing Secretary Pompeo, and I've talked to Ambassador Bolton. Who else do I have to deal with? And the point is we have a robust interagency process that deals with Ukraine. It includes Mr. Holmes. It includes Ambassador Taylor as the chargé in Ukraine. It includes a whole load of other people. But it struck me yesterday when you put up on the screen Ambassador Sondland's emails and who was on these emails, and he said, these are the people who need to know, that he was absolutely right. Because he was being involved in a domestic political errand. And we were being involved in national security foreign policy, and those two things had just diverged. So he was correct, and I had not put my finger on that at the moment, but I was irritated with him and angry with him that he wasn't fully coordinating. And I did say to him, Ambassador Sondland, Gordon, I think this is all going to blow up, and here we are.
And here we are. And those three words are so key. Domestic political errand. That's what Gordon Sondland was on. He was on a domestic political errand to help Donald Trump. Gordon Sondland is the ambassador to the European Union, but he's focused on a domestic political errand for Donald Trump, to help Donald Trump win re-election in 2020. And he is the conduit. He is the one talking to Trump and saying to Trump, what's going on with the Ukrainians. In fact, to Donald Trump, this was such a high priority. Gordon Sondland is sitting in the Ukraine on July 26th at lunch with David Holmes and takes out his cell phone, unscheduled, calls President Trump and gets him on the phone within minutes. And has a conversation where it's not disputed. Sondland testified this and Holmes did as well. President Trump wanted to know about the investigation. That's how important this was to Donald Trump. Gordon Sondland is he's keeping one piece of information from us, or he was reading shorthand with Donald Trump. That Donald Trump told him as well, everything is in play here, a meeting and the aid. And then finally, Fiona Hill says something here which is stunning. She goes to John Bolton, who none of us really like, neocon who led us into the Iraq War, conservative, right-wing guy, but who's been in government long enough to know when he hears what's going on, he hears international ambassadors, U.S. ambassadors to international countries, are talking about a domestic political errand. John Bolton knew instantly, go to the lawyers, because this is bad. Here's clip number 16, Fiona Hill.
Did you have a conversation with Ambassador Bolton after the subsequent meeting with Ambassador Sondland?
I had a discussion with Ambassador Bolton both after the meeting in his office, a very brief one, and then one immediately afterwards, the subsequent meeting.
So the subsequent meeting, or after both meetings, when you spoke to him and relayed to him what Ambassador Sondland said, what did Ambassador Bolton say to you?
And when I came back and related it to him, he had some very specific instruction for me. And I'm presuming that that's
what was that specific instruction?
The specific instruction was that I had to go to the lawyers, to John Eisenberg, our senior counsel for the National Security Council, to basically say, you tell Eisenberg, Ambassador Bolton told me, that I am not part of this whatever drug deal that Mulvaney and Sondland are cooking up.
What did you understand him to mean by the drug deal that Mulvaney and Sondland were cooking up?
I took it to mean investigations for a meeting.
Did you go speak to the lawyers?
I certainly did.
You relayed everything that you just told us and
I relayed it precisely, and then the details of how the meeting.
As Chris Liu, who was on yesterday, who worked in the Obama administration for 7 years, told us, in all those years, not one time did he hear anybody say, go tell the lawyers. That's how stunning this was. And as Fiona Hill and Alexander Vindman have testified, who both went to John Eisenberg, national security lawyer, it's not something they've done before. That's how this was startling to them. This was alarming. This was so out of the norm. This is not what you do when you're on the National Security Council. You work on our national security. Your focus is in the title of your position. But Trump made it about a domestic political errand. That's what this was about. His re-election campaign. And for John Bolton to call it a drug deal. And don't forget, when you hear Mick Mulvaney, acting chief of staff, but really, more importantly, he's the head of the OMB, Office of Management and Budget. And it was the Office of Management and Budget that just a week and a half after that meeting announced that the aid to Ukraine was being withheld. And what we also learned from the testimony of another person, that aid was not first held up on July 18th at that meeting. That aid was first held up in mid-June. So it was all being held up when this was happening. And it's sort of like putting puzzles of a jigsaw together out of order, out of chronology. And yesterday, Adam Schiff, I thought, did a great job summing things up about what we had seen and what we should do as a nation. Here's clip number 17, Adam Schiff last night, right before he adjourns the entire public hearings.
The day after Bob Mueller testified that Donald Trump invited Russian interference, hey, Russia, if you're listening, come get Hillary's emails, and later that day, they tried to hack her server. The day after he testified that not only did Trump invite that interference, but that he welcomed the help in the campaign, they made full use of it, they lied about it, they obstructed the investigation into it, and all this is in his testimony and his report. The day after that, Donald Trump is back on the phone asking another nation to involve itself in another U.S. election. That says to me, this president believes he is above the law, beyond accountability. And in my view, there is nothing more dangerous than an unethical president who believes they are above the law. And I would just say to people watching here at home and around the world, in the words of my great colleague, we are better than that. Adjourned.
And with that, Adam Schiff ended the public testimony section of the impeachment hearing for now. Just so everyone knows the procedure, what's going to happen is it seems the Intel Committee has already begun. Their job is to write a report. They will then deliver that report. It'll be like a Mueller report. They will give it to the House Judiciary Committee. That committee will look at the report. That committee, and we had many members of the House Judiciary Committee on this week and last week. Sheila Jackson-Lee was on. Ted Lieu was on yesterday. Jamie Raskin. They said based on the report, they may call more witnesses. This public testimony part might not be over. And I hope it's not over. There are more people. We must hear from Mick Mulvaney. We must hear from John Bolton. We must hear from Rudy Giuliani. Even for Giuliani to sit there and take the Fifth Amendment over and over and over again on national TV so the American people can see that. And Mike Pompeo. And the reason they're not testifying is because of one person, Donald Trump. Because I can assure you, if their testimony was going to help Trump, they'd be testifying. Those people would destroy Trump. They would make a horrific situation even worse. So it's going to go to the House Judiciary. I think they have to have some hearings that after their work is completely done, they will draft articles of impeachment. The House Judiciary Committee will vote on those various articles. If any article, say they draft 5, for example, I'm just putting it out there, 5, any of those articles get a simple majority vote in the House Committee, it goes to the full House. And there'll be another debate. I'm sure a robust debate. Republicans will cry and scream and whine. And if any article there in the House gets a simple majority, that's it, just a simple majority, Donald Trump is impeached on each and every article. It gets a simple majority. And at some point, we have a trial in the Senate. I could tell you this, when I laid all these clips out, and the GOP defenses are destroyed. The GOP defenses are that Donald Trump wasn't concerned about corruption. No one with a straight face can say that. Ukraine is engulfed in corruption, and the only person he asked about is Joe Biden and a server from the Ukraine. That is not fighting corruption. That is getting ready for a 2020 campaign in regard to Biden, and secondly, furthering a Russian Vladimir Putin narrative that it was the Ukraine who attacked us. Secondly, the big argument from the Republicans is that in the July 25th phone call, President Zelensky didn't even know aid was being withheld. That was destroyed by the testimony that we played the clip yesterday, and the testimony of the woman from the Pentagon who made it very clear that's absolutely not true, that they knew on July 25th. Add to that, as she testified, the anti-corruption measures were done in time, and Laura Cooper testified that they had done by May the anti-corruption measures deemed necessary by federal law. So you had that. The idea that the Ukraine attack was destroyed by witness after witness after witness. So what has Donald Trump done? What has this proven? This has proven very clearly Donald Trump has committed bribery, extortion, violation of federal campaign finance laws, and obstruction of justice. And quickly, we'll take it through this. Here, bribery is defined by 18 U.S. Code Section 201. You don't need this federal statute to impeach someone. Impeachment is defined by the members of Congress. But under federal law, if a public official, directly or indirectly, demands, seeks, or receives anything of value from someone else in return for being influenced to perform an official act, that is bribery. Hence, Donald Trump saying to the Ukrainians, investigate Joe Biden, and I'll give you an official act, which is a meeting at the White House, and I'll give you an official act, which is military aid. That's bribery, folks. That fulfills all the elements. There's no debating this. That's bribery. What's extreme? Very simply, federal law, the Hobbs Act, says very clearly that if a person under the color of official right, meaning an elected official, would, under this official right, ask for something, all you have to do is try to get it. You don't have to get it. You try to obtain property from another that they can even consent to, and you do it under the color of law, the color of your official right. Any article or commodity, I don't want to get the legalese here. Essentially, if you're able to ask for something using your position that you're not entitled to because it helps you personally, that's extortion. And you don't need violence. You don't need a threat of force or anything if you're an elected official. Our federal courts have defined that the coercive element of this statute is fulfilled by simply if you hold public office, because you have the power of public office. For me as a private citizen, I would have to threaten someone with violence or force. How is it a violation of federal campaign finance law? Simple. You cannot solicit anything of value from a foreign national, let alone a government, but from a foreign national, anything of value to help your campaign. We all know that because when Trump Jr. was meeting with the Russians to do opposition research, everyone made that very clear that was the law. Obstruction's also patently clear. Obstruction of justice, Donald Trump is preventing witnesses from testifying who have relevant knowledge, and he's doing it knowingly and willfully. Those are the crimes. You don't need these crimes, but these are the articles of impeachment that you're going to see. You probably won't see extortion. You'll see bribery, because bribery is one of the enunciated reasons to impeach somebody. It's treason, bribery, high crimes, and misdemeanors. And I can assure you this, and we'll talk about this more next week, when the framers of the Constitution drafted high crimes and misdemeanors, it is not as ambiguous as people want you to believe it is. It's not. It was based on British law at the time. And British law at the time defined high crimes and misdemeanors. And there's so many treatises on this. Like, it's ridiculous the way the media talks about this. High crimes and misdemeanors, in shorthand, was an elected official abusing and breaching the trust of the public, using their office to breach the trust of the public to benefit personally. That's a high crime. That's what Trump did here, folks. There is no doubt if the framers were here, they would impeach and remove Donald Trump. So I tell you, and I submit to you, my ladies and gentlemen of this listening jury, that Donald Trump is guilty of various crimes and impeachable offenses. He should be impeached. There should be a trial in the Senate, and he should be removed, making him the first president in the history of this great republic to be removed. He deserves it. He will not be removed, though, because he has bribed the jury. So it is up to us to remove Donald Trump November 3rd, 2020. That's where we stand. So I talked a lot. I wanted to have these clips here. People want to listen on demand over the weekend. You can listen to the clips more and more. You know, I wanted to lay it out in sort of a long form way. I could have just made it about the crimes here, but you've got to get a flavor of what's going on. The stakes, the Ukraine aid is so vitally important to the Ukrainians. The attacks of Marie Yovanovitch show you how desperate they were. They had to destroy and smear her. Trump could have fired her. He didn't. He smeared her because they were trying to send a message. She was standing in the way. And I believe they were sending a message to every other ambassador. If you stand in the way of my sinister goals, you'll be destroyed, not just fired. I'll destroy your reputation. And the list goes on. This was a drug deal, John Bolton called it. So alarmed, he said, go to the lawyers. Alexander Vindman, Purple Heart recipient, lieutenant colonel, heard the phone call, immediately went to National Security Council. This is where we stand. This is an easy case to prove. If we were in a real courtroom with an unbiased jury, Donald Trump would be convicted. I have no doubt. I'm sincere, no doubt. He'd be convicted of various crimes. This is where we stand. So let's take a break. I went really long. We'll take 2 quick breaks together. Well, we will have time for phone calls right after that. 866-997-4748. Be right back. Look, it's time the media start calling out Trump's false statements for what they are. Lies.